How often do you read the Bible? How much of it have you read? What are you looking for when you do read it? With billions of Christians and Jews, you would expect endless Bible study to be a core aspect of our society. For such a central set of texts, you would expect more people to want to pick these apart like it's Thanksgiving dinner. But they don't. And when they do engage with the Bible, they usually fall into several traps. Today I'm going to describe the 4 biggest mistakes people make with the Bible. Trap number 1. Not reading the Bible. How happy is the one who does not walk in the advice of the wicked, or stand in the pathway with sinners, or sit in the company of mockers. Instead, he delights in the Lord's instruction, and he meditates on it day and night. The first entry in the book of Psalms doubles as both a piece of worship music and an instance of wisdom literature. As is common throughout Proverbs and the other books of the Bible, these verses are urging you to read the Bible and to study it closely. If you aren't doing this, then consider if you're actually as familiar with the Bible as you think you are. You may know the vibe of Christianity, you may be guided by its ethical and moral teachings, but that's as deep as you go. Actually, a crucial element of godly living is meditating on the Lord's instruction, or his Torah. This instruction is found throughout the Bible, and you cannot begin to comprehend the Lord's will without familiarizing yourself with the core texts of your faith. You should have a reading plan. A chapter a day is a good way to start, and there are also convenient Bible in a year plans, but perhaps reading in multiple chapters or whole books in a sitting would also give you a sense of that book and its author in a way that breaking it into smaller parts wouldn't. If as a Christian you don't have a handle on the Gospels, those books in Acts are a great place to start. Alternatively, if you feel confident about those, you should try some lesser known books like the books of the prophets. Do you know what every book of the Bible is about? Really consider this question, because as obvious as it sounds on its face, this isn't something that most Christians consider. What do you think you'll find? There's always more to discover. Trap 2. Reading with a lens. If you do read the Bible, what's the motive behind it? Assuming one is doing more than a surface level pass on the Bible, those who dig in deep usually end up filtering the Bible through 2 lenses. The first is reading from the perspective of a theologian. If you're committed to a particular theological school, you're only filtering the Bible through the lens of that school. Rather than wandering through the scriptures and taking them in like a vast forest, you're sticking to the well-worn roads of your denomination. It's important to know the major roads and to navigate by them, but you should routinely venture off and discover what you otherwise wouldn't have ever learned about. Alternatively, Christians online will often venture off the roads, if it means finding resources for weapons, where rather than marveling at the beauty of the groves they find, they immediately dig into the earth and begin mining for apologetic arguments. Apologetics is crucial, especially as the new atheists will just often do the same thing, but it shouldn't taint your ability to set that aside and marvel at the scriptures. Trap 3. Verses out of context. Along similar lines as the last section, think about when and where you do usually come across the Bible. Maybe you see verses on bumper stickers or billboards. Maybe you see someone citing a random verse in an argument on a college campus. Maybe you've heard an array of verses used to give life advice in a sermon. Verses are hurled in Christian versus atheist apologetic debates, or Christian versus Christian theological debates. We seem to only use the Bible when we need to make a point. Verses that may mean nothing to one person may be a linchpin in a complex theological treatise for someone else. It's sometimes surprising how an entire dogma may rest on 1 or 2 verses. If we don't add further evidence, such as readings from contemporary Jewish literature, we'll have no idea how the writers or readers understood a text. Everyone from Mormons to Muslims, atheists to cultists can interpret a verse in different ways. We're probably all familiar with the crazy conspiracist who draws random connections between clues to unveil a hidden plot. We also all know the doomsday predictors who arrange numerical patterns from Revelation and Daniel and claim the world is about to end. Using verses as shorthand to build an argument is quite ancient. Both the first Christians and the earliest rabbis were wielding verses in this way, and this is how the practice originates. But rather than being a conspiracist or a doomsday predictor, use the passage itself to interpret a verse. Think about a passage you know. Do you know the verse before it? Do you know the verse after it? Do you know the stories before and after it? Do you know how the verse factors into the book and underscores its thesis? A text out of context is pretext for proof text. Language is infinitely complex, and any sentence could have an endless array of possible meanings. How does the context refine your understanding of a verse? Rather than leaving open this vast array of possible meanings, we should narrow them down and hone in on what the author had in mind when he wrote it. Every sentence in a book plays a role, and more than anyone, the writers of the Bible had a purpose behind their writings. Despite all the interpretations of the work we've invented, we have to do our best to find the correct ones. Trap 4. Picking the wrong commentaries. Of course, the Bible and the various books inside it can sometimes be a very difficult collection to understand. One of the most ancient forms of Jewish literature is a commentary. The books we call the historical books of the Bible weren't just dry accounts of history, as the books themselves point out. Readers were expected to look at the sources, like the Annals of the Kings, to get that. Rather, the writings of the books were describing the history of the relationship between the Lord and Israel, how God and his people fell in and out of love with each other. It was a series of texts explaining what had happened and how to understand it. In other words, it was a commentary on history. Yet these books can be complex and difficult to understand, and naturally we need further explanation. The practice of Midrash emerged early as a way to explain scriptures. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Aramaic Targums, and in rabbinic literature, we find troves of texts explaining the Hebrew scriptures and how to make sense of them. In time, the apostles composed the New Testament, and the rabbis composed the Mishnah, both of which proposed opposing ways of making sense of the scriptures. Further commentaries were written as patristic texts, and the Talmuds made sense of the new writings. And today we have a deluge of commentaries, devotional books, sermons, classes, monographs, institutions, and faith systems, all striving to make sense of the oracles of God. Naturally, we have to weigh perspectives and evaluate these commentaries, and especially when the perspectives conflict, we have to evaluate them. The insight you'll get sitting cross-legged in a college Bible study, where everyone's trying to come up with their own answers, thousands of years and thousands of miles from the place where the biblical books were written, in languages and cultures nearly incomprehensible to our own, will be minimal. Many pastors, wise as they are in church theology, don't have time or resources to penetrate deep into the labyrinthine depths of biblical literature, geography, history, etc. Even professors who spend a lifetime expertly mastering one biblical subject will be hopelessly lost outside their areas of expertise. It's hard not to see the Bible through someone else's lens, and if we want to hone in on the correct interpretation of the Bible, we'll have to enlist others to help us understand it. In my opinion, pastors rarely offer insight that I didn't already know or couldn't have figured out on my own. Academic commentaries are extremely helpful and I love them a lot, but they usually approach the Bible with serious skepticism. Often authors will state conclusions very confidently and conclusively. It's important to weigh the evidence presented and understand if these conclusions are as decisive as their creators claim they are. Sometimes they may even have an agenda to push and may be consciously or unconsciously skipping important details. Even conclusions with strong evidence get discarded by scholars, and some famous theories like the original documentary hypothesis, the original Deuteron mystic theory, or the Alexandrian canon hypothesis have stood for the better part of a century before being picked apart and dismissed, or revised. Sometimes archaeology validates the Bible, as has frequently been the case with Old Testament history. Persian-era discoveries in southern Egypt corroborated details in the Book of Nehemiah. The answers will continue to surface and may surface long after we are dead that shine light on difficult passages. These are extremely active fields. In the process of discovery, it's important not to get swept up with biblical skeptics blindly. Criticize the critics, and know that apologists are systematically working through critical claims. I'm a devout Christian, and I believe there are answers, but on this channel I'll dig into many of these criticisms. It's crucial to confront these ideas and to work through them, even if it's for the sake of argument. But even if these arguments lead us away from our original perspective, as they surely will, never forget the core of your faith and why you believe. The details may not be what you thought when you started, but the truth lies at the heart of God's Word. To conclude, you can't just rest on your laurels, and you can't just rely on the vibe of Christianity. But studying is hard, especially when you factor in all the supplementary materials. Lately, there seems to be an interest in patristic texts, especially among Protestants and people rediscovering Catholicism or Orthodoxy, and that's important. But you can't stop there. To really understand the Bible, you have to be familiar with the context, with the rival Jewish theologies, with the geopolitical shifts that the Bible was responding to and explaining, with the social context that the Bible took for granted. Here on this channel, I want to fill that void. Rather than being a theologian or apologist, I want to be an explorer. I'm not an expert on the scriptures, but I'm certainly a student of them. I don't know the truth, but I'm traveling to find it. So come voyage with me.